Welcome to the Made for More podcast. You're joining us in our second series titled Walk With, where we explore different issues of mental health that people could be going through and how we can walk with them well. Although we get mental health professionals in this season, none of them are doctors. So please, if you need help or if anything we discuss in the podcast triggers you, pause the podcast and call your GP. Hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of our mental health podcast. This is actually our series called Walk With. Last series was Let's Talk. So if you haven't tuned into that, go back and check those, but also you can check episodes 1 to 3. The first 2, Jamie and I overshared on what's going on in our own lives. Well, I overshared. Obviously, okay. Jamie asked a question and I overshared. Then I tried to get him to overshare so that I didn't look so bad. And last week was really great. We had Deborah Nelson on from Impossible Mental Health, and she was just sharing CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and how that's really helped with young people and children. So we have been doing all of that, and today is very exciting. We have our very own KathrynPurcell with us. So Kathryn, thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
I used to work with Kathryn, and Kathryn, you're actually technically my boss. I counsel through Anchor, so Kathryn is my boss. Very scary, very professional.
Scary.
Yeah. Kathryn, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself? Nice lippy today.
Thanks so much.
I love, Kathryn has a range of lipsticks. And but that is a very, very nice one. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time and coming on to our podcast. Would you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, of course. So I am KathrynPurcell. I am a counsellor and a sensory motor psychotherapist. Oh. Yeah. So I started my counselling training, I would say nearly 20 years ago now. And once I had received enough training and passed enough assessments and assignments to be allowed to be actually practicing with people.
That takes a while, doesn't it?
When I was released, I then began a volunteer student placement with Anchor Counselling, a little community counselling outfit in East Belfast. So that is where I began. And interestingly, after a number of job changes and organisation changes, I found myself back at Anchor as the manager there in 2014. So I work with children, young people, but mostly adults now, and particularly probably in and around. I would do a lot of work with trauma, people who have received or experienced childhood trauma, or actually anybody who's experienced trauma at any time. I will work with them.
Anyone, basically anyone
that needs
anyone
it,
in society. Come on in.
Yeah. So
with Anchor, so I obviously do the same way as you're starting. You started off as your volunteer Anchor. That's how I do my counselling. So Anchor is brilliant. And we get such a wide range of clients.
We do,
which is brilliant.
Yeah, we do. I think that's a really lovely thing. We're situated in a particular interface in which there's a number of different neighbourhoods and communities that can access us. And that was always the heart behind the Anchor setup, that anybody in need would be able to access it, and that there would be no, I suppose that's, there's no reason that anybody can't access it. They could be low income, they could not be from our community, they could, any background, any language. Actually, we've worked with interpreters and everything. So we'll take on anybody that's that we're safely able to work with.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so you said counsellor. And what was the other part of your qualification? I feel like I've never heard of that before. Could you explain that? But also could you explain why you got into, what made you want to become a counsellor in the first place?
Okay. Yeah, for sure. So I don't know if whenever you were at school, you had to do these little tests, psychometric testing, and they try and match you up. Your careers advisor would be like, you would be excellent at this. You'd be
golf greenkeeper.
Oh, beautiful. Who knew? I did not know you were so outdoorsy.
Neither did I, but the test did.
These people don't know you. All of mine came out social worker, family support, all of those things. Ultimately, I went to uni. I did a degree. I did a master's in English, literature and social anthropology, which didn't overly qualify me for any of those helping professions. I took a couple of years out, did a bit of traveling, did a bit of teaching abroad, and came home, started to work for a bank, and was like, I think I will not survive very long.
Like me on the golf green.
In this environment. Now, I will say it taught me some really key skills, like absolutely about management, about corporate work environment, all of those things. However, I knew that I needed to be doing something that felt helpful.
Yeah.
And so at that time, what I did was I contacted Childline, and I did a little training program with them that essentially equipped me to be one of their volunteer phone answerers. And so I started there, did a bit of voluntary work with them, realized I still felt like I needed more equipping. And I wanted that. And that was the other thing about counseling at that time. Like even 20 years ago, there were certain programs, there was bits of research, as you know, but it's still it was hard to find really reputable, decent training. I think sometimes it's still hard to find that, if I'm being honest. Absolutely. And so for me, I really wanted to be very well equipped. I wanted to do it properly. I wanted to look at research. I wanted to read articles on brain function and development. I wanted to know what actually would work and would help folk. So at that point then I was able to, I went to Queen's and I started off there. I did some of they had a Queen's University. And so I did a training course with them on a certificate in counselling. I then began my voluntary work. I did a specialist qualification working with children and young people. Really enjoyed that and still do enjoy that. However, I felt like I was getting a lot of trauma presentations through, and I wanted to make sure that I was dealing with those effectively. And sometimes talk therapy on its own won't be the help that a traumatized person needs. Or a traumatized brain needs. So it was at that time that I began researching different methods and what's out there and what works really well. And sensory motor psychotherapy is a way of dealing with trauma that is safe for the traumatized person and supports their whole nervous system. It supports them in an embodied way. So it looks at all of you rather than just your trauma. And it supports people to be able to integrate that and move through it and then be able to let it go.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I just want to know more about that. Yeah.
Feel, deal, heal. Well, I think it's a thing. If you yourself have ever had a moment, if you just say you stepped out onto the street by accident and you like tipped off the edge of a curb and you feel it all through your body, don't you? There's like a bit of an adrenaline rush. There's a bit of and you maybe have had a traumatic or a difficult or frightening experience, which afterwards you could feel your body moving. So the theory behind sensory motor psychotherapy is that our brains take on trauma almost as an injury. There's almost like a brain injury that can occur as a result of a significant trauma, but our bodies sense it and our bodies feel it. And what we have learned and what the research will also support is that people who have experienced trauma, unfortunately, the retelling of their trauma can be re-traumatizing in itself.
Yes.
And there was a lot of really beautiful work done around that in the aftermath of both world wars, actually. So soldiers returning home who were maybe shell-shocked and things like that. They had a lot of physical symptoms that people thought they were just mad. They'd gone crazy.
Yes. And
actually it was their bodies really desperately endeavouring to rid itself of the trauma, whether it's through shaking or acting out. So things like that.
It's fascinating.
It really is. And there's still so much that we don't know about it, but we do know some things that really don't work well. And then we do know some things that can work beautifully.
Yeah.
And so for me in the therapy room with regard to like the sensory motor psychotherapy, Paul, I will say something. In that thing about me talking about sensory motor psychotherapy, I would say that I do integrate the other modalities of training that I've used. So it's not that there's only one thing that you can use in the therapy room that will be helpful. I want to be really clear about that because I think sometimes we can get a little bit, in the therapeutic community, we can get a little bit snobbish.
Like what's your...
my modality is the only one, and that's not the case. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, actually, I genuinely believe that it's the connection between the therapist and the client are able to forge together that therapeutic alliance that really underpins how far the healing's going to go. Yeah. If you've made an excellent and like amazing connection with that other person in the room, you're going to do well. Yeah. Because you're recreating a relationship in which you can act out all your stuff, you can bring it all, and healing must therefore follow. Yeah. So that I just wanted to say that whenever I'm talking about sensory motor psychotherapy. But sensory motor psychotherapy I love because personally having experienced a few traumas myself, both particularly physical traumas actually, which is probably useful when you're saying, why did you do this? I had a really significant like neck and back injury as a result of a gymnastics accident.
Yeah.
That resulted in me being hospitalized for like well over a year at the age of 11. I had to have a number of surgeries as a result of that. And so I know like that physical trauma can also, it reverberates throughout our whole system.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it always felt quite intuitive. Like I knew that I wanted to support and help other people to heal.
Yes.
If that makes sense. So sensory motor psychotherapy, things that I would do is I just observe. I'd be watching the client. I make sure that I'm observing if particular areas are like twitching or moving while they're speaking to me. I'm just taking a lot of those cues.
Yes.
And I will try very hard, I suppose, to support them in thinking what's going on there.
Yes.
Whenever I asked you this began to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what does this mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Does this do?
Why do I twirl my hair all the time?
Why do you?
Why, when I get stressed, does it get faster and more aggressive? Why is it? But it is.
And it's what is our system trying to work out? And I'll give you like it's a bit of an anonymized example, and so there's no confidentiality breach or anything. But like I worked particularly with somebody who'd experienced an attack. A physical attack, very suddenly, extremely shocking. They received a physical injury, but worse than the injury that they quite quickly recovered from was the recurrent sense of fear. So they were really struggling to walk across the street. If somebody was walking down the street towards them and they were walking, they were almost flinching. So they were, and then experience almost panic attack symptoms. And in the room, as the person was speaking about that, they were sort of going, and I just feel, I feel like this. And we were able to work with that. I was like, what is this arm doing? Like, what is the arm doing? And as it turned out, in the moment of the attack, the person was carrying like a heavy shopping bag and hadn't been able to defend themselves. And so what we did in the room was like, why don't we experiment with that? Let's work this out in a way that allows your body to reach the resolution that it never got in that moment. And so we began and they began then to actually, they began to, so I was like, just imagine if I came towards you and you did feel shocked, what might you want to do? And they did begin to move, and then they began just moving the arm like this. And they just said, this feels amazing. But in that moment, the fear broke. Interestingly, in that moment, the fear broke. And there were many other things around that. We had established trust. We had done other experiments. I knew there was no dissociation involved. I knew that the client was robust enough to play about with a little bit of experimentation. But do you see them physically being able, it broke the power of the traumatic memory because they were able to give themselves a different ending.
Yeah. And defend where that had been the thing that they were never able to do.
Absolutely. So it was healing. They were able to affect healing themselves and just the beauty in that moment and the freedom in that person going, I don't need to be really frightened about this. And it didn't.
Isn't that amazing? Because that seems so kind of insignificant, just waving your arm around in the air, but actually connected to that trauma, connected to that memory. Yeah. That's actually huge.
And the arm feeling trapped, this sort of being dragged down. And so just as a very small example, but I think it's a lovely one in that it shows you, I suppose, the power of what our bodies hold with regard to memories of trauma as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose another reason for me getting into that specifically is our own local context, I suppose, specifically in Northern Ireland. And I'm aware there'll be folk who experience trauma all over the world, but this is where I am situated. Yeah. And I was finding that the majority of people coming through my door had experienced what any sort of psychiatrist, what anybody would name as a traumatic event. And many of those actually also conflict-related traumatic events.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be able to ensure that I could offer a support that was safe, that was healing, and that didn't trigger them and make them worse.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Especially for something that is going to come up. So even if someone comes in with like anxiety or depression from a situation that's happening now, many people in Northern Ireland have that from their past.
Absolutely.
And we know that in counselling it comes up.
Yeah.
So actually for you to have that is massive.
So it felt important. It was a big investment, I guess, in terms of time, and really stretched my brain in a very different way. It's a different type of teaching. But it has shaped and formed and informed me in a way that felt really useful and significant.
Yeah. So honestly, it's like fascinating. I could listen to examples all day.
Yeah.
So what else are you seeing now?
Yes.
So we're kind of with young people.
Yeah.
What are you finding a lot of people are coming with? We know that a lot of young people are really struggling.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
what are you seeing in your profession at the moment, recurring? Maybe you're speaking to parents, maybe you're counselling parents of children who are struggling. What kind of common themes are you noticing?
Yeah, well, I guess what I would say is, why I believe that what has happened during, I suppose, if I'm allowed to say, the pandemic, what I would notice is I feel like the pandemic exacerbated a lot of issues that may otherwise have remained sort of low level, you know, like manageable. And then we have a significant period of intense stress, intense pressure. Education's disrupted,
which made everything underlying
it just magnified it all. And then I think coupled with that, the imposed sort of need to be isolated from particular friends and family members. At that stage of adolescence is really like for young people, young adults, it's very significant. So I guess a lot of nothing of what I'm seeing coming through is completely new and I've never seen before pre-pandemic, but what I would say is it's more intense.
Yes.
And so I was thinking about, what am I seeing the most of? It still all boils down. The majority of what comes through to me will be relationship issues, whether that's for young people or whether that's for adults. And I'm not talking about romantic partners necessarily. I'm talking about people's ability to forge and maintain good connections with other people.
Yes.
And so for young people, that may manifest in them feeling like they can't manage friendships very well. They perhaps feel really lonely, really isolated. If they knew the real me, they wouldn't even like me. So there's a whole sense of isolation, fear, loneliness. And it's the same with the adults that are coming through. A lot of what is going on at the moment is about isolation and loneliness and a difficulty around forging or maintaining really close connections. A lot of anxiety, a lot of low mood, a bit of self-harm. I'm not sure if self-harm's increased or if people are maybe speaking more openly about it.
Yeah, speaking up more.
But it's certainly something that's out there that's very significant. I guess what I noticed, particularly with regard to the pandemic, I feel like the people who were hit hardest and hit first are the most vulnerable folk that we have.
Yeah.
So we've got our single mums, we've got folks with health vulnerabilities, we've got our young people and adolescents that don't have a huge amount of autonomy themselves. So they're having to live under the conditions that somebody else has imposed upon them.
Yeah.
And we all felt that a bit whenever restrictions were put in place. We all felt the bit of but what if I want to do this?
Yeah.
You know?
I might want to go on 2 walks a day.
Yeah. I've never walked a day in my life, but now I want to because I've been told I can't.
Remember like buying a chocolate bar in Tesco? You're like, they're going to see this as like a non-essential. I'm going to probably be arrested.
Don't start me. Like, I remember having an argument with my husband about like if it was okay for me to go to like a particular park that was maybe 3 miles away.
Instead of the local.
But just say the police. Just say the police stop us. What will happen? But anyway, so. It's silly and yet it isn't. It's still the reality of what folk we're dealing with. I would say, I think as well for young people too, the pandemic also unfortunately unleashed, I suppose, a bit of a non-restriction around the use of social media devices. Relationships are being forged through Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok and I'm not sure how good that is for a healthy personal relationship for people. It creates a weird, there's a strange sense of intimacy. You may know a lot about somebody and then you meet them in real life and you can barely say hello. And I think particularly for like young people, young adults, that causes issues.
I remember one of the schools we went into and it was just after schools were kind of just opening up and we were kind of talking a little bit about like mental health and relationships and things like that. And one of the girls was saying, oh no, I've been going out with this guy, I really, really love him, but I've actually never met him in person. And that is just like, that was actually their reality, because but then it kind of became at that wee age that they have in their brains and forming, as you're saying, relationships, that became all they knew.
Absolutely.
So then to go back into the social situation, what we see in schools all the time, rooms filled with people, silence, because they're just on their phone.
Can't speak to each other.
cannot speak to each other. And as you're saying, that's actually massive, because we need relationships. Relationships are really important. How are we even going to form anything growing up and different things like that? But also, how are we forming the relationship with ourselves? Like, what does that even mean?
And even the space of the time to consider that, because if you are constantly scrolling and being distracted, where's your space to consider, how did I feel about a particular thing? What do I actually believe about this? What is my own opinion about any of this? And so I do think that is really tricky. And also there's a weird thing I think that occurs online. People become disinhibited. So you will tell more to somebody because they're not in front of you. So it almost doesn't feel, it's real, but it doesn't feel real. There's like no danger to like revealing something of yourself if that person isn't like sat in front of you, like you and I right now. Whereas if we were messaging on a screen and we'd never actually seen each other face to face, for some folk it almost feels easier to unburden themselves in that way. And so, but then unfortunately there's a very negative element to that disinhibition, which is that they will share things that they shouldn't be with people who can't be trusted.
Absolutely.
Because they don't know them. And then that also creates,
you also don't know who it actually is.
Exactly.
You know who you think it is.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think whenever things are online, people become not people and they become objects.
Yeah.
So you would say things that you would just never say. So I think that relationship thing is really key. I think that's really, really good. And actually to think about is really positive.
Yeah.
If someone is, if you're noticing, so say you're maybe like a parent or you're a teacher and you're noticing, do you know what, these kids I'm working with, they're really struggling. What tips would you have firstly for them? So if you notice that a young person is struggling that you see, what would you say are kind of a few things that you would do first for them?
So it's hard. Well, I guess it depends on the context. So what I would I'd follow on from the previous point by saying, I think relationship is one of the most important things that you can give to a young person or to another adult that you see, friend, family member, child, aunt, whatever, who's struggling emotionally and mentally. The most key thing that you can offer is relationship. And so what I would say is, for a number of the young people that I have been working with, there's a great sense of shame that they've almost disengaged. So if they've had low mood, anxiety, social anxiety, and have therefore disconnected. So now we don't have restrictions. They're able to be invited out. Why don't you come along? Let's meet up. Shall we go for a walk? Do you want to meet up, go on a date, whatever? And then they're actually like, oh, I can't. I am too. I can't do this in person. And then they disconnect, or their mood is low. Anxiety, depression, they don't answer messages. And so what I would say, if you are the friend of, the parent of, the teacher of, assuring that other person that you are still there, even when they are a wee bit unresponsive, can be super helpful. And I mean, I'm not talking about stalking, obviously, but it's like,
I'm outside. I can see
knock,
you.
knock, knock, I'm at the door. No, it's more that thing of, hey, I know you haven't answered the last text. Absolutely fine, but I just want to let you know I am still thinking about you.
Yes.
Care for you. Whenever you feel up to it, just give me a shout. And to continue to connect in that lovely, like, shame-free connecting. If the person that you're concerned about is an adult and you know that they're receiving the support that they need, so like professional support, you know they're in therapy or they're on medication, but they're maybe isolated alone. That could be something like leaving like a meal on the doorstep. Like, don't be saying, what can I do to help you?
Yeah.
Now you can if you want, but if they don't answer, here's my challenge. Go and do something anyway.
Yeah.
Do something anyway.
Yeah. Or don't say, if you need anything, I'm here. Just let me know.
Just let me know. Because they can't ask.
Yeah.
And most of the time you can't ask, and you know yourself personally, how amazing does it feel if somebody like rocks up with something you didn't even know you needed or wanted, but it shows that they've thought about you.
Yeah.
And
even if you don't want it, even if you're like, I don't like that, it's just the thought that someone's had for you.
Yeah.
But that's really good advice, because as we're talking about relationships, so therefore relationships are hard, but therefore as they're scrolling on TikTok or whatever, they're not thinking about, okay, well, what does that mean to me? So the relationship with self is actually damaged. So therefore a lot of the time they won't know their own needs. They won't know what they actually want or what they need, what they desire. So when you say, here, we'll reach out to me, like what's going on, like I don't know, but they just know they have to withdraw because there's something they can't engage with.
For sure. And I think that, so there's something around, if you really care for the person, you continue to show up in a way that feels meaningful but not overwhelming.
Yes,
so
that's
that
really
will
good.
be, I'm going to drop this person round like a bag of their favorite coffee beans, or if it's a young person, I'm going to get some like sweet box delivered or donuts, and I'm just going to say, I think you're amazing. I know you're having a hard time. I'm still going to be here whenever you feel better. Interestingly, a client of mine, one of the most meaningful things for her whenever she was very low was a particular friend of hers would have arrived round at her house and sat beside her, and they didn't talk. She just sat and she would have come round once a week to read, like for an hour, her own book, and she'd have sat beside the person who was very low, very depressed, like struggling really to lift their head. And she just came, she's like, I want to be with you. I know that you can't talk or deal with the pressure of like having a chat, but I'm just going to sit. I just want to be here. And
that's
so
so powerful, isn't it? So powerful.
Like week upon week upon week, that person continued to show and just read their book and then got up and was like, okay, see you next week, bye. And no pressure, no. So, and I mean, obviously that doesn't work for everyone, but what I'm really, above anything, I would encourage folk, like, get a wee bit creative, like think outside the box and don't be personally offended or rebuffed. And here's a big one. They can see that each other is online. You know, like WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, chat, whatever. It's really easy to see if someone else is online or they posted something but they didn't answer your text. Yeah. And it's like, listen, if someone's struggling, they may have the capacity to look through memes from now to kingdom come, but don't ask them to respond to it. They can't. Totally, and so it's that sort of thing of almost setting aside to a certain extent, I guess, your expectation that someone will always be reciprocal. And I'm talking in this very specific circumstance when we know someone's low, when we know someone's struggling with their mental health, when we know there's a difficulty there, it's okay to lay down some of those expectations of what they may be able to give you back. Yeah.
But also having, like, if we're thinking specifically if you're working with teenagers, teenagers are your specific.
Yeah, teenagers are your demographic. So then it's just continuing to show up, continuing to check in, trying to relate to them in a particular way that you know is meaningful for them. Yeah. And that will differ from teenager to teenager. But for the most of them, even if they're not answering, they'll be really happy that somebody thought about
Consistency is just to know, do you know what, even if you are not answering right now, when you want to or when you feel you can put words together, I'm here to walk this alongside you.
That's really hard for parents or responsible adults or statutory folk like teachers and something. If they feel like they're trying and they're not getting anything back, I think that your immediate thing can be, okay, this isn't working, it's not helping them, or they're uncaring, they don't care, nothing I do gets through. Yeah. And you have all of that. And I would just don't give up. Like, keep going, keep offering them that safe space. Keep saying, I'm still here. I know you're struggling. I'm still here. So to offer that consistency, of course, once you know they're receiving the help they need. You know, I'm not advocating just like checking out, you know, but once you know particular supports are in place and it's about maintaining a relationship, then just consistency and not expecting too much of them.
Graham. Yeah. Thank you, Kathryn.
No worries.
Thank you. Really appreciate you coming on here today. That wisdom is so good. And even just thinking about relationship is something that we really don't think about, but how we do that has massively changed from any generation before. Like, our teenagers are having to navigate something they never have.
Absolutely.
They're doing relationship in a brand new way. And it's actually probably very unhealthy. Is the reality of the way they're doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you for shining a light on that. And I'm sure it gave help to a lot of teachers or things like that as well. So thank you very much.
No problem.
So guys, thank you for tuning in. We will be back next week with a girl called Rebecca McCulloch, who's going to work with us and chat to us about what it looks like to work with people who are autistic, who have autism, and their journey of their mental health. Thank you.